Welcome to Skip-O-Matic's Model Mania. I'm Skip. This is my trusty assistant and imaginary friend Earl. And this is the second video of 3 videos about making silicone molds and casting a couple of resin parts. In this episode, we are going to be making a 2-piece squish mold to make these rails to go on the base we made the mold for in the first video. So we're going to make a mold. We'll cast both rails in the same mold at the same time together, and it'll just be a squish mold. It's not like an injection type or anything. You just fill it up to a certain level, you put the second half in and squish the excess out, and keep some weight on it or something to keep it together while it catalyzes and cures, and presto changeo, you'll have a part. So anyway, let's get busy and make a mold. Okay, well, now that we got the base mold or usable base mold made, now we're going to do a mold for the train, the actual track rails. I'm not going to build a mold box for this per se. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the clay to build the box. I've rolled out a bunch of clay. I just made a layer of clay here on this board. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press these rails about halfway down into the clay. What we're making is the bottom half of the mold, and we're going to just push this down in so it goes about halfway into the clay. You know, roughly, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Okay, they're in the clay. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to make like a moat around here. And basically by doing that, what I'm making is a wall of silicone, so that when you pour the silicone into the bottom half, it'll actually be more silicone than you need. So it'll be like a pool of silicone, so that when we make the top half and we push it into it, it'll squish out the excess, but there'll be plenty of resin in there to make the whole part. So you'll if you're not quite picturing it, you'll see it when we get it all going. So that's why I have a lot of these clay working tools and stuff where you can do carving and everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start making a moat around this. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this moat. We're just going to go all the way around it. It doesn't have to be perfect, because it's, you know, the part is the only thing we're worried about. So we're going to dig that out. Alright, so as you can see, you can basically see what I've done there. I made a trench around it. I'm going to go back with this, and I'm going to make sure that it's deep enough. I figured on this one I need to be 4 to 5 millimeters deep to make sure there's enough resin when we actually pour the part. And then once I do that and smooth that out, then I'm going to build a little I'm going to take clay and build it around here to hold the silicone when we pour this half. So let me clean this up and get our wall built, and then I'll come back and show you it when it's all ready to start pouring. Alright, here we go. I made sure that little trench around inside there makes it so that it's about 5 millimeters deep. And then I went and built this wall. This is going to be my mold box. This isn't going to be a pretty mold. This is just kind of down and quick and dirty. So it's not going to be very pretty. But the most important part is this right in the middle. The part. That's what's the important part. What I did also is, since this could be disorientated when you have the two halves, I took the end of one of my clay carving tools. It's a nice rounded end, and I just made some register points so that when we do the second half of the mold, it's going to make these spots so that you can only put this mold together one way. And I usually do it so that, like on this one, I put 3 on this side, 2 on this side, and only on one end. And that way you always know which ends or go to which ends. So that's basically it. That's going to be the bottom half of the mold. So all I need to do now is mix up some more silicone and get it poured in there. And we'll be able to make a part here pretty soon. So let me get the silicone mixed up and then we'll pour it. Alright, I got my silicone measured out and my catalyst measured out. I'm actually going to go a little light on the catalyst. It's still going to harden, but it'll slow it down. That may have been another problem with the mold, the other mold. I may have put a little too much catalyst in, and it being old, it probably they'll do weird things, and I think it kicked off because it was acting like it was catalyzing too fast. So here we go. I'm going to mix this up and pour it in there. You just got to make sure you mix it up real good. And you can't dilly-dally. You got to get at it because the stuff is kind of fast. This is slower than the resin, but you still don't want to be goofing off. You want to make sure you get at it right away. And I don't see any swirls. It looks like it's mixed up all right. This is old silicone too, but this one actually, when I went to stir it up and everything, it looked a lot better than the other stuff. So this might not be quite as old, but it's still got to be 2-3 years old. Alright. We'll start at one end here. Just kind of let it self pour in and fill in. Good. I was afraid I might not have mixed up enough. It looks like I got more than enough. That's good. mold's a little thick. That'll be fine. I'm gonna make it a little more rigid. You don't have to worry about it deforming. It'll be a little bit stronger. Oh yeah, I got way more than enough here. I was afraid I wouldn't. Yeah, that'll work fine. Alright, all we can do now is let this sit. Sometimes if you kind of tap it around, it helps some of the air bubbles come up. I know that seemed kind of silly. Alright, that's it. That half is poured. We'll let it sit several hours. If it's getting a little late in the afternoon, I'll probably let it sit till tomorrow morning or whatever, and then we'll pull the clay off and do the other side. See, there's some air bubbles still coming up. It'll do that for a little while. When we come back, a lot of these will be gone. I'm pretty happy with that so far. Alright, well, till that cures, we're kind of done for a little bit. So now the silicone that we poured is all cured and set up. So the first half of the mold is basically done now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim off, I already started here, I'm going to trim this excess clay that was our retention wall and some of this extra around the sides so that we can flip this over and it sits flat. I've already separated it from this piece of ABS. You just have to be real careful. You don't want to bend this. So I gently worked it till I got it popped off. And now I'm going to trim it up, and then we can flip it over flat, and then we'll clean up the clay around here, trying to leave for a retention wall for the other side. And if we have to, we'll add a little bit of clay. So let's get this trimmed, get this cleaned off. You can just take this stuff. It's pretty easy to work with. Just take the X-Acto blade, clean the clay up. Just try and keep it as close to the silicone as you can. Like I say, we didn't do a mold box for this. This is kind of just a quick and dirty way of doing this. The mold won't be pretty, but what's important is how nice it is where the part is going to be. If I was making a mold that I plan on using a lot, I'd spend more time with a nice box and make it all nice and square. And so there's that. That should sit fairly flat. Now we'll trim So we're probably going to want to use this clay. Let's see. You want to try and be as careful as you can because you don't want to break that part loose in this first half of the mold yet. Alright, so there's that. Now we can flip it over. And we'll have to start digging out some of this clay. There's the silicone starting to show up right there. Now be careful, you don't want to cut in, especially where the part is. Be patient. Even with a mold box, you're going to have to do some of this. Hardest part's getting it started. Once you start getting it going, it'll start peeling up. See, there's our part. Okay if you cut some of that silicone in certain places, because when we pour the other side, it's going to fill up whatever. You don't want that part to break loose from that silicone yet. It helps keep, when you pour the second half, from seeping down in your first mold half, and it'll still make a part, but we're going to try and make it as clean as we can so that there's this little cleanup when you pull the part out. So as you can see what I'm doing here. Silicone won't stick. The silicone doesn't stick to anything but silicone. So this is going to take just a little bit of time. I think you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go ahead and finish getting this all exposed, and then when I come back, I'll have this pretty much cleaned up and ready to start doing the second pour for the second half. Okay, we got it all dug out and cleaned up, and there you can see the bottom or half of the mold. And we got a little wall here to retain the silicone we're going to pour on top. I'm now putting mold release, rubber to rubber mold release. And you have to do this on the silicone, because the silicone will stick to itself. It will weld together. It won't stick to anything else, but it will stick to other silicone. So that's what I'm doing here, is putting mold release on all the silicone parts. You can get it on everything else, but most importantly it has to be on the silicone. That's the only time you need to really use mold release. So I got one coat on there. I'm going to have to put 2 or 3 more. Once this dries, I'm going to put 2 or 3 more coats of this on it, and then we'll be ready to mix up some more silicone and pour the top half of the mold. You can see there's our registration marks that we put in. All that's to help keep the mold from, it's to help align the mold, and it's also to help the 2 halves from shifting on each other. Because you don't want your 2 halves to shift. Because when you pour, you know, this part will be there won't be anything there to hold the mold. Of course, on this one we have the little wall here, so that when we put the 2 halves together, there'll be plenty of resin to squish out, and it'll fill all the cavities. And then with these registration marks here, it helps lock it all together. And it also lets you, the way I did it, also lets you know which end is which, so you don't mix up the ends. So we're going to let that dry now, and I'll put probably a couple more coats on there, and then we'll come back and get the other half of it poured. Alright, so we're ready to pour the second half of the silicone. We have our mold release on there, 3 coats of that. So now we're just going to mix up the silicone and pour it in there. So let's put our catalyst in. Mix that up real good. Make sure it's all mixed up nice and uniform. And I'm pretty sure I got more than enough that I need here, but this is getting old, so I didn't bother with making an exact amount. So whatever's left, I'm just going to let it harden up, because this needs to be used up anyway. Okay. Let's just start pouring it at one end. And just kind of let it find its way. Pouring it on the high spots on the side here, just letting it run down into the low spots. It'll fill itself in. Just going to fill it right to the top of our wall. I think that's going to be it right there. And there's not a whole lot left in there. Really wouldn't have been enough to use anyway. Okay, I'll let that sit up in there. We can throw that away. I got a little bit of catalyst left over for when I get more. And that's it. And you can see it's got all kinds of little air bubbles there right now. But they'll all come out as this slowly cures. Before it gets too hard, a lot of those air bubbles will all dissipate. It'll completely gas out. And that's it. And we let this cure, and then we'll clean up all the clay and split it apart, and we'll have a mold. So when we come back, we'll be breaking our mold apart, pulling the plug or whatever you want to call it, or that we're copying, and then we'll pretty much be ready to start casting parts. So when we come back, we'll get that ready. Now that the silicone is set up, it's been sitting overnight again, it's fully cured. Now we're gonna clean up some of this. I already slit this. We'll peel some of this extra off that came over the clay. Make sure to cut that. Like so. Throw that in the garbage. And now I'm gonna pull this clay off. Try and keep the pieces of silicone out of it. And it's not real pretty, but it's going to be a mold. Just ball all that up. Okay. Put that with the rest of the clay. Okay, now here's our mold. Hopefully this will split apart. There it goes. There's one half, and there's the other half. Pull these out. Actually, I can probably just, there we go. See that? They come right out. Those are our original parts. Now we should be able to make copies of this. Simply, I'll clean this up, clean some of this clay and stuff off of here. Then all we got to do is pour resin in here on this half and put it back together like that. Hold it down and let the resin cure, and we should have parts. You see how nicely it all fits together. So there it is. There's two halves. So there's that mold. So basically, I clean this up now and make sure the other one's cleaned up, and then we're ready to pour some new parts. So let me do that, and when we come back, we'll see about pouring them. Well, congratulations! You made it to the end of the second video in a Yawn Fest of videos about making molds and casting resin parts. Also, come back. There's one more video. We'll actually cast parts out of this mold and the mold from the first video. And hopefully you like this and you'll come back. As always, don't forget to share, subscribe, and like. Do all those things. And anyway, have fun building your models. If you're not building models and you're thinking about it, quit procrastinating. Just start. It's a lot of fun once you get started. And don't be afraid of it. Just do it. Just do it. So until next time, we will catch you later.